Two of our favorite podcasts are crossing over every 2 weeks. Kate Achille of Up Next at Work and George LaRocque of Work Tech look at the tech, business, and people that impact our HR and work tech industry. It's a crosspod with a unique strategic lens on what's happening in our world. Enjoy!
Hey, Kate, welcome back.
Hey there, George. Here we are with another edition of Up Next at Work Tech. Where are we going today?
Well, from the frozen tundra that is the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, we've got some interesting sort of high-level conversations, I think, to have today based on what we've both pulled up for this week. The first one that we had both noted to jump right into everything is Workday has not a new CEO. They're back to their old CEO. Their CEO's leaving, and it's very ambiguous. We don't really know exactly why, and we can talk about some of that. And that's Carl Eschenbach, if I'm saying that right. And then the co-founder and former CEO, who has been the chairman, Anil Bousri, will become the CEO. Now, it doesn't say that that's temporary. It just says that he will become the CEO. So that's my mind first goes to, well, is this the CEO's departing? And it's not unusual for the chairman to step in, run the show while they replace the CEO. And especially when it's a co-founder or someplace like Workday, they're hanging it on everything I've read. Everything comes back to this is such an important time because of AI. And I think, well, it's been an important time because of AI.
Yeah, I mean, 3 years ago was an important time too when Carl joined, right? Because 3 years ago is actually, I think, so he joined in December 2022. Isn't that like right around the time ChatGPT was released? Was like November, December?
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's
so
a good eye.
He joined at like the moment essentially for AI.
Right.
And has been here at the moment.
And they've been on AI, they had hired score before that. And so not generative AI, but it's not like AI is new to Workday. Also, I went and looked at their stock and, it hasn't been doing well. Like when you look at the 6-month view, it's basically been a bumpy ride, downhill. And you noticed some things. I'll let you, I don't want to steal your thunder. Another good eye on your part.
Yeah. Well, they did announce that they are doing a small workforce reduction. I guess it sounds like they're going to do it. They announced it. They filed the WARN notice here. And then it sounds like the restructuring is going to take place sometime at the beginning of Q2, though. And they said it's approximately 2% of their workforce, which is about 400 people that are going to be impacted. And the article I read in HR Executive said that most of the roles are going to be non-revenue generating. And it looks like the global customer operations team is the one that's going to be impacted in this RIF. They did a more sizable one in 2025 where about 8.5% of their workforce was impacted. So now they will have restructured about 10% of their workforce in, a year.
Yeah.
And with the CEO's departure, all of this is in the lead up to their 2025 full year earnings call, which is scheduled for February 24th.
Yeah.
So even though they're not saying a lot, it's, we're recording this, it's February 9th. Yeah. Even if they're not saying a lot in their statements, I think they're speaking volumes ahead of the earnings call that's coming up.
Right. That's true. That'll be an interesting earnings call to listen to. They could be as unclear as they are now on this, or it may be a little more obvious if they don't have great news on their earnings call.
Yeah. I mean, earnings, I think we saw last week, just from the stock market, that earnings, how did my financial advisor put it to me? Earnings have to be absolutely stellar for the market to perform well right now. And I think we saw that things were a little shaky last week with some of the earnings that were being reported. And, you noted that maybe Workday stock hasn't been on the up and up trajectory the last 6 months. But I don't think they're the only ones in the space that are seeing maybe a little bit of a downward trend, which we also sort of noticed in one of the other things we pulled this week, which was about the release last week of Anthropic's Claude Cowork and the ripple effect that had sort of both, in the larger software space, I guess you could say, which the Wall Street Journal wrote up and used the term doomsday scenario for
Yes.
the $1.2 trillion software industry, thinking that maybe this is going to lead folks to start vibe coding software instead of purchasing it, which, Chip Cutter over at Wall Street Journal included a chart showing, how Workday, I think Salesforce, a few others,
Yeah.
how their stocks have been.
ServiceNow, Intuit, and Monday.com have been performing much differently than the S&P 500.
Yeah.
It's scary because, well, these aren't the companies that have been propping up the economy. So that's been more,
NVIDIA,
yeah, yeah, right.
8% of the S&P, I think they are right now or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. But it is scary. I don't know that I believe that this points to vibe coding. I just happened to write a piece about our space. I titled it Vibe Coding versus the CHRO. And it's all about, you can't avoid that. Like all of a sudden the hype on vibe coding's loud this past week or two. And I think it just lacks at this moment. I'm not saying the future won't provide more, but at this moment, when you talk to your vibe code app, Lovable or whichever one you're using, what it brings back doesn't handle things like, GDPR or compliance in HR or even scaling beyond 500 users, but to 5,000 customers, or taking care of changes that happen in regulations and need you to change the code. So scalability is hard for people to get their head around, but it's a real thing in enterprise software. And what Vibe Code gives you back is something that's great for your desk and for you to use. And it's incredible, or maybe for a small team or something super internal, but generally not. I don't see like Vibe coding a replacement for Salesforce. I just don't see it.
How about as a first draft? Like maybe you take sort of like writing, like here's your outline for what you could, go from here with your code. Maybe that's an option with vibe coding. Cause yeah, when you and I were chatting beforehand, I was talking to you, cause everyone's been up in arms about Moltbook, the Reddit for AI agents. And I was mentioning that was vibe coded.
Yeah.
And that there's already been a huge security breach with that, as the AI agents have gotten mad at their humans and shared sensitive information like credit card numbers.
Oh, God.
So I think that's an example right there of something that was vibe coded quickly. It's only been live for, I think at this point, like 3 weeks. It's for agents. Like humans are not supposed to be on Moltbook. So I don't know what the moderator situation is, if there really is one. But was anybody checking to make sure that the agents couldn't,
Clearly not.
share what they wanted? Because,
Clearly not.
I
Yeah.
don't know that, Chase or your local financial institution was expecting fraud alerts based off of AI agents, just posting everyone's, information online.
Yeah. And that story, you mentioned it earlier when we were chatting, I haven't seen that anywhere. I have seen a lot of buzz around. I mean, it's really creepy. It's basically a social network for agents, and they're talking to each other like people would and sharing things like people would. And some of the stuff they're saying is scary because they're to the point where I don't even know if it's real. Like I'm questioning whether it's real, but I guess at least some of it's real if the agents are pissed and sharing credit card information.
They're mad at their humans too.
Yeah.
Like the whole dynamic is just strange. But yeah, vibe coding, I think the whole premise of it too, when we first started hearing about vibe coding, around this time last year, was the idea of it was that, teenagers essentially were the ones who were doing it because they were able to whip things up quickly without having to know a lot, because they had these sort of advanced skills because they've been raised with AI essentially. And now it's translating across, the workforce, and vibe coding itself is scaling in real time. And so that's a project that is taking on a life of its own faster than I think the concept was meant to.
But to your point, I've been making this point recently. It's for like product managers. It's, we're way past the Figma demo. Like it used to be, we had this elaborate clickable demo that really didn't do anything. Now you've got a prototype that you can get put in the hands of a user, see how it goes. And you get pretty far before you spend $1 of engineering resources. That's super powerful, but doesn't scale. It does not. When I look at, Workday, who's on this chart from the journal,
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a CFO or a CHRO putting their ERP and their payroll on a vibe coded interface coming from, the person down the hall who said, look, this is just as good as Workday, what I've created.
Oh my
It's not
gosh. Yeah.
there's so many layers of complexity in our world specifically.
I'm picturing Workday's, IT and security teams. Just like the absolute heart attack that they must, that those teams must be having around vibe coding in general. Because I mean, I think anyone listening, if you've ever had any sort of office job and tried to do something external, you've heard from somebody in IT, like, you
Yeah.
can't use Slack, like we're a team shop, or like
Right.
you can't, we use Microsoft, you can't use your Gmail for, like the simplest things will set off,
Right.
your IT and security teams internally. So like the idea of vibe coding an entire new solution quickly and then trying to implement it
Right.
inside even a small company, let alone a Workday. Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I think that was the point that some of the, CEOs that are interviewed in the Wall Street, or quoted, I should say, in the Wall Street Journal article, they're a little tongue in cheek in their responses. Like, yeah, how are we going to take down an entire, like $1 trillion industry just because vibe coding exists now?
Right.
There are entirely too many interests at stake here, let alone the, obviously millions, billions of people who are employed and all of the infrastructure that exists. But
and you know what? Anish Akaria from A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, said that software costs represent only about 8 to 10% of enterprise spending, relatively small, and that a fraction of what vibe of that with vibe coding, and it isn't worth the legal and compliance risks for most companies. And I think that
there you go.
That cuts right to the chase.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'm sure they have a dog in the vibe coding hunt. I'm sure they have they've got money on all the major trends for sure. So
100%. Yeah. And this comes from that report that you pulled, right? About sort of the state of generative AI in the enterprise.
Well, that quote came from the article that you pulled, but it's a great segue. And Menlo Ventures did some work. It was released in December. I didn't find it until recently. It's still very current. And they weren't looking at investment. They were looking at buyer habits. And it's a big report. We can put it in the notes when we publish this as far as the link. But what's interesting is when they looked at what was being bought versus what was being built internally in 2024, enterprises were buying 53%, purchasing 53% of their AI capabilities.
Get ready to turn up the volume on your HR game. I'm Jay Arnold, former musician turned HR leader and host of Backstage Pass, the HR Rockstar. Each episode pulls back the curtain on key HR topics, from leadership lessons and bold career pivots to the latest in HR tech and talent strategies, featuring the rock stars within their industries. If you're ready to shake up the status quo and amplify your impact, this is your all-access pass. You can catch the show on the Work-Defying Podcast Network and wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe now and let's rock the future of work together.
Building or planning to build 47% internally. In 2025, 76% were purchased. Only 24% were being built internally. And I think that we've seen a lot of hesitancy the last couple of years, except for very specific areas within our world, our HR tech world. And I think we're seeing companies start to realize, including some of the platform vendors themselves, like we can't build everything ourselves, and we need compliance and security and scale, and we don't have time to wait. We're under pressure to do this now to compete. And I think that's reflected also. The other interesting point, the thing that really jumped out at me, I thought it was worth sharing, is that when I talk about our world, we're used to saying, we're 10 years behind everybody else, but we're in the top 5 of departmental AI is where they're saying where most money is being spent. And the top 5 are market research, finance and operations, sales, product engineering, and then HR, ahead of marketing, customer success, data science, and a general IT bucket. So that's a change. That's very much a change. Now, they put us at 59% of is being purchased. I would say their cohort, I don't know the methodology behind the report, but their cohort probably includes more like high growth. And I would say it's directionally accurate. I would say we're seeing more companies come back, understand they need to purchase. It's probably over half being purchased. And I think it will continue to go up. I just don't know that we're already at 60%. 59, 60%. I don't know what you think about all that.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I think the marketing piece is interesting to me, of course. I mean, coming from the PR marketing comm side of things, there was a report that came out recently on the state of generative AI and AI in general in PR. And that showed that it's already peaked the usage, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Okay.
And that was basically, obviously, we only have a few years of data and usage, really. Peaked might be a strong term. But it basically said the use of AI 2024, 2025 was identical. And so that's what they're saying. That's why they're saying it's peaked, is that like there's no growth in terms of adoption beyond that. Thing like, I think it was like 75% marketing PR practitioners are using it. And that was it. Like the other 25% are not apparently intending to adopt. So
that makes sense to me. And well, you would know this space better than me, better than most. I feel like it's a great example of where in a world where you're trying to build a message that stands out, using a tool that predicts the next word based on everything that's already been written isn't necessarily going to help you stand out, but it could be helpful in just structuring the press release. Like, don't forget this and that in this order, however you like to structure your releases. I don't know, that it seems like that makes sense.
There's helpful, but then it also kind of goes to what you were just saying, that like there are helpful parts of it, but it's more like market research, like where the AI comes in handy is like building lists of things, doing research. Like that's where, AI is useful as a tool. So is that really marketing and PR? Is that really, so there it's a little blurry in terms of how we use it and how we apply it. But again, I think in general, it's interesting. And PR and marketing agencies are pretty much never gonna build. We're always going to buy because most of us are smaller. I mean, obviously there are some big agencies out there, but even those places, we're not usually build sort of.
Yeah.
It's just not. So anyways, I thought all of this was interesting though, because I think another year or two of data, we're still pretty early on and having enough to compare to.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think all of it is interesting though, especially kind of going to what we were talking about in terms of what's happening in the market and how much AI is sort of sucking up oxygen there versus what's happening inside of organizations and how much people want to be using some of this too. Because that's also, we don't talk a lot about like, do people want to be doing this? Because some of the backlash we hear is it's just making things noisier. I'm just having to correct it. I'm just having to, it's actually creating more work for me.
Yeah.
So, it's the ongoing conversation. There's really not much more to talk about these days in AI, which is sort of funny.
Right. That's very true.
So, yeah. Actually, no, there is something else to talk about other than AI. Look at that. I found a segue for us, and that is human rights, which is a conversation that has also been evolving a bit here in recent years. And this one kind of flew under the radar a bit, at least, in my readings. And
mine too.
That is the Human Rights Campaign, which I think most people have at least heard of. And if you haven't heard of it, you've probably seen their logo before. It is the blue logo with the yellow equal sign in it.
Yep.
That is the Human Rights Campaign released their State of the Workplace research last week. And that includes the Corporate Equality Index. The Corporate Equality Index is actually 24 years old. The first one was launched in 2002. So for anybody who thinks that DEI or any of that is a newer concept, 24 years of data. So the thing that jumped out at me in terms of what they released last week, though, was they got about the same number of companies participating in 2025 as previous years. It's about 1,500, I guess. 1,500. But notably, they had a 65% decline in Fortune 500 companies. So I guess it went from 377 in the 2025 report to only 131 for 2026. They did note that a number of Fortune 500 companies are federal contractors, so they're indicating that that is might have something to do with why, some of these companies were reluctant to engage.
That makes given the current climate and how they're regulating, that makes a lot of sense. That's it right there. I think that is probably the best assumption.
Yeah. But what they were saying in terms of what's changing, though, is that when it comes to actually like policies and what's happening inside of workplaces, their policies themselves aren't changing so much, but what's changing and what's really impacting employees is transparency and clarity. So, you have fewer companies participating in indexes like this, but employees don't really know why, and they don't know what's happening. And from the executive summary, it said the decline in submissions reflects a shift in how employers are approaching transparency in the current environment, a shift that, as this report demonstrates, has real implications for employees regardless of whether underlying policies have changed. So that's a more succinct way of saying what I was trying to say. So they're saying there hasn't been a rollback of inclusion policies, but we just don't have as much clarity and transparency as we used to.
Yeah.
Which I think is true because, I was talking to an HR practitioner earlier today who was saying, the thing that's changed for them, again, they have all these new executive orders. They don't necessarily know what to do with them still, though, a year like into the current administration, I should say.
Right.
So
right.
That there is a lack of clarity. Oh.
Yeah, I think it's all around, and I think transparency is best. I think it's sad to me that the Fortune 500 pulled back, felt like they should pull back, felt like they had to pull back, however they would articulate it. That is not a good thing for anyone. But they're also, I'm not giving them a pass here, but they're also navigating in waters where this is one that we didn't talk about in advance, but there's the Department of Labor is going after Nike, around not being fair in their hiring and management practices, largely because of their DEI policies. So in that climate, that's a scary place to operate in. Like, you don't know, because the regulations haven't necessarily changed. There have been some orders that have changed some things, and now they're running the risk of having to defend themselves.
Yeah.
In this climate, and that's a scary place to be.
I will say one of the positive things that the report did share, though, is 534 companies, which I guess is roughly a third of the companies, earned a score of 100 on the equality index, and they are going to be recognized with the Equality 100 award, and that means that they are leaders, basically in LGBTQ plus workplace inclusion. So to get 100, you are considered of the most equal, I guess. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But
I wonder if you could take this, like the conversation we just had about the waters that everybody has to navigate, whether you're an employee, an employer, whichever, looking in either direction, extrapolating that thought to think, it's so not transparent in those larger federal contractor organizations, will the workforce start to gravitate toward not necessarily smaller businesses, but businesses that are not federal contractors, not, in that space where they're going to, be less transparent because of the political climate. So to smaller or smaller, large cap companies, I don't know, that it's interesting. You could see that. I could see that for sure.
I would bet, because I do know there is a stat in there that says, like, when workers are uncertain about like where their company stands, that they're more likely to consider leaving the organization. And I think it was something like 86% of the workers have described their current workplace as hostile.
Wow.
86% are considering leaving at this point, which
Wow.
obviously the job market is tough right now. So that puts people in a really, that's a challenging position to be in if you're uncomfortable where you work, but you don't necessarily want to enter the current job market.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for
but yeah,
sure.
so that was another one. And I think that brings us to the state of the industry, sort of.
Yeah. Getting into the M&A and is that, or yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
State of the industry.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry, I switched the name around on you there.
No. We were a lot of these topics are overlapping. So, it's interesting that I think what I had seen a couple of things that jumped out at me, the deal that I'll put out there that is not necessarily in the HR tech space, but it's being almost positioned as such, is this company Nullify raised $12.5 million round, which is a big seed round.
Big seed.
For they're in the world of AI product security, but they position their product as AI workers. So there's this term, which I hate, that I never hear anyone in our space say it, but we're going to start hearing because I'm seeing it in a lot of places. It's the silicon workforce. So,
oh, I hope we don't.
Yeah, but this whole idea of AI as employees, and it is coming up where a lot of conversations that I'm in recently are around strategic workforce planning and how we're now looking at, labor market statistics and workforce statistics and internal stats on our workforce and looking at planning, with humans working with bots, humans working alongside bots, and that it seems like that's the slope that we're on, is moving into this era. So I just thought it was interesting the way this was messaged.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really hope we don't hear that term, silicon worker,
I hate
whatever.
it. I hate
No,
it.
that's bad. I still have issues with white collar, blue collar. So, maybe don't listen to me because I might be overly judgmental on this one. Wouldn't be the first time. But what I do think is interesting, well, there's a lot that's interesting in terms of how this is going to impact messaging, though. For years, I know HR has struggled with the human resources nomenclature. So what does this mean for strategic workforce planning if your workforce now doesn't just include humans? Is it just human resources now? Like, what are we going to, and you're not just people ops anymore.
Right.
It's not just, what are we moving towards?
Yeah.
I think we've been struggling with maybe I know HR has wanted a rebrand for a number of years, and we've talked about human capital. We've talked about all these different terms and how nothing ever quite fit. I think HR leaders have felt like nothing ever quite fit, and now it's not going to fit anymore. And so I think we're going to have to come up with something new, and a new category is being created, whether we like it or not.
That's true. That is true. I think we're also, I think, expect more struggle. I think we're also going to struggle more because it would be one thing if HR it's one thing to be responsible for the planning around those resources, but when you're not the one necessarily driving the decision on those resources, because a lot of this is fluid, right? Like we're doing strategic workforce planning, and today here are the bots that we have. Here's the AI workforce that we currently have, but IT or finance or marketing or whoever goes out and buys a new one in Q1,
Tomorrow.
It's much more fluid than we're used to because we're only dealing with humans. Augmenting is easier to plan for than this sort of, I guess, replacement.
And SaaStr actually had a really good story. It was a few weeks ago, but they had a story about how there was a bug in one of their bots, and they ran a story, I should say, but they had a bug in one of their bots, and they couldn't figure out which one it was. They had like 21 different bots, and they had to go through and figure out which agent, I guess I should say, where was the bug in this network of agents. And so that's another thing. And, you just reminded me of something else, George, that I don't know that HR is ready for. but this is tangential. I was talking to Rebecca Wedeman the other day from Valois, and she was telling me that one of the things that she's really focused on this year is the evolution of customer success and how, obviously AI is having a big impact on that role, but people who've gone into that field went into it to work with people, obviously. And now you're going to need them still, but they're going to have to orchestrate these agents. And that's a whole different skill set. And HR, it's going to be the same thing. Current HR people didn't enter into human resources to oversee an army of AI agents.
Right.
They don't necessarily have the skills either to understand how, if there's a bug in the compliance bots, how to troubleshoot that. Does HR become the person who fixes that? Is that an internal issue? Is it an external issue? Is that your vendor? If you've built, this is going to create chaos.
Yeah.
As this evolves.
Yeah. They never really exposed that when they did the Clone Wars movie, like how it was all, managed to the back. But that's what I'm picturing is these bots talking back, I mean,
they're on Moltbook.
Exactly.
They're already mad at us. So yeah.
Right. Sharing our credit card information.
But yeah, I mean, this is something HR is going to have to, we've talked about upskilling and reskilling and all of that for years. These are the skills that they're going to need. And who is going to be teaching, who has them currently that can be teaching them or designing the courses?
Yeah. And I think the part of the problem is right now and this isn't all for regulation to decide. In some cases, it's for the employers to decide, the companies to decide. But this is all, it feels like the Wild West because it's happening to everyone, not with or for everyone. So right now, it's almost like we're just letting the AI run and we'll figure it out versus having a value or a principle or a strategy that says, in our customer success department, our humans are always going to be here, and this is what they're going to be responsible for. And this is where we'll leverage technology. And we can see the next 18, 24 months. That's where we go. And you could do the same for sales and development and everything else. But right now, it just seems like it's just willy-nilly. And sometimes decisions are made that are not thought out. And I want to point this out. Someone shared, so I've given this example on the engineering side. There was one point where the CEO of Anthropic came out and said, in 6 months, we won't be coding. We won't have any humans coding anymore.
Yeah, that was last May.
Yeah.
I think we're still coding.
Yeah. 6 months later, they had jobs on their website for folks to code. Today, they're hiring a ton of salespeople, a ton of marketing people. They're hiring humans. They are hiring humans. So it's interesting because we're adopting this out in the field, and the companies that are developing this are seeing the value of humans. They're not just plugging AI in. So I think it's chaos.
It is, but we are going to have to stay in control. That's the part that scares me a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, we do have a couple more deals though, or I guess funding rounds that happened this week.
Yep. The other one that I pulled up was, I guess it's pronounced Curios. And this is a quick one. The reason I pulled them up is they are in Dubai. So they're in UAE and they raised a $5 million seed. Nice size seed round. They are in the world of talent acquisition. They're basically a job board marketplace that leverages AI to provide a few more capabilities to candidates and employers. This is about new markets, growing markets and emerging markets, right? To me, that's what this deal is about. When I look at I look at a lot of these deals, I don't see, nothing jumps out at me as novel or new in the world of marketplaces, specifically job board marketplaces. It is right in line with, I've been saying for years, if you're providing additional services, you'll have a niche to grow within. But, it's just interesting that there's still money being raised for these, how many of these have you written? You said,
gosh, like this? Hundreds.
Yeah.
You can probably blame me for some of the messaging that exists today. I won't say which you can
the
blame
good
me for.
stuff, the good
Yeah, oh
messaging,
yeah,
the good
obviously.
messaging.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Something like improving efficiency. No, this is interesting though. I'm always interested when like a sort of a new geographic market really starts to pop off, and we are seeing more and more come out of Dubai lately. So, and yeah, again, another seed. I'm seeing a lot of seed rounds lately.
Yeah. Well, and that state of the industry type that we talked last week, a lot of the money's going. I was just looking at this this afternoon again. 193 deals in 2025, 163 of them were in early stage. Now, at the other extreme, there were 17 mega deals that were $100 million or more for each.
Okay.
And the total was 56% of the 6.24 billion that was raised last year. So you've got the really big growth companies, private equity and VC are doubling down on those. You've got seed deals, the 163 deals was only 1.1 billion. That's a lot of money, but comparatively, the middle is squeezed, right? So you've got new players getting a lot of money. There are a lot more fighting for it. So it doesn't feel easy. It doesn't feel like, it's not easy to raise any money right now, but your pre-seed, your seed rounds, those are out there. It's your getting to A is really hard right now. If you've made it to B and you're AI forward, there's probably money out there for you because you're in growth mode. You're scaling.
Well, and that brings us to the last one, which kind of ties this up with a bow, and that is Wellfound, which is a startup, jobs for startups. They acquired Hirefly, which is an agentic recruiting platform. And the reason I pulled this one was because Hirefly is one of those 2021 companies. They were founded in 2021. So one of those pandemic era startups. And so to your point about getting past seed to A, I didn't look to see, how much Hirefly had really gotten to, but this is one of those ones where we're now seeing another one get snatched up, kind of like we had talked about in the last episode, where these guys are all just getting picked off, the ones that otherwise would probably be going out for A at this point, or potentially B.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I don't know Hirefly, but I would be a fair assumption to make based on every founder I speak to a lot of them in 2021, they probably weren't thinking that they'd be exiting at this point. But the market isn't what it was in 2021. That's for sure.
It looks like maybe they had raised about 6 million, probably seed, angel, something like that. It doesn't look like they had actually done like a formal seed round.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's everything we got this time around. I think keep an eye on Workday and their earnings call here in a couple weeks.
Yes. Yeah. We know what we'll be talking about in a couple weeks.
Yeah. And then, that brings us to Rose and Thorn. What do you got, George?
Rose and Thorn. So my Rose and Thorn, I'm going to be, all right. So it's one thing. It's both.
Okay.
Both a rose and a thorn. I grew up in New England, and the New England Patriots lost the Super Bowl last night, which is a thorn. Of course you want them to win, but just the fact that they were there, the way I was putting it is they were playing on house money after week 10. Like they had no business being in the Super Bowl, but they've made their way there.
They did.
And I had kind of been, just to put this in context, a few years ago, I was kind of like off the NFL. And I just liked watching the group come together. And I'm sure we'll get, right now their PR is fantastic. I'm sure we'll get the real story. And, there's always a real story in the NFL with NFL teams. But right now they just look like a bunch of good people who, lost the big game. So we'll see.
Yes. So I have no football team that I really support. It's funny. I was born in Boston, but my dad is from upstate New York. My mom is originally from Long Island. For whatever reason, I was taught to hate Boston teams growing up, despite the fact that I was born there. Go figure. So really don't have any allegiances in my household growing up. So I just kind of watch these games to watch the games. Yeah. My rose is Bad Bunny's halftime show because I thought it was really fun, brought a lot of energy. I would say my thorn would be Green Day's opening performance because I thought that was lackluster. But I'm gonna give my thorn actually to Punxsutawney Phil for showing up and giving
Yes.
us 6 more weeks of winter.
Yeah.
Because as much as I love small furry creatures, that rodent, who does not have a good track record for accuracy, I think it's only like 30%. Yeah, I'm over this. I realize
I
that,
am so over it. Yeah.
is that George and I obviously geographically live fairly close to one another, but for those who are not based in New Jersey, we have had the same sheet of icy snow now for about 3 weeks. The temperature has not been above freezing in about 3 weeks.
Yep.
I am a beach bunny, so this is just not working for me. I need to go to Puerto Rico with Bad Bunny. That's kind of where I'm at. I need a break. So that's my thorn.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. And not to make you feel worse, but I saw an article about there are all these different creatures that people watch to predict what's coming.
Yeah.
And like all but one of them predicted more winter.
Was it Staten Island Chuck? Remember Staten Island Chuck?
Yeah.
He was fun.
Yeah.
Until
I don't know
Bill
if
de
he was in there.
Blasio like killed him. He was, yeah. That was another, I think he was a groundhog too. But yeah, so Punxsutawney Phil, not my friend. Bad Bunny's
No.
halftime show was a lot of fun though. And honestly,
Very
the first
good.
3 quarters of that game were putting me to sleep. So
Yeah.
the Patriots did do a good job of holding their own until the 4th quarter. I will give them that much. Those teams both had tremendous defenses.
Which makes for a boring football game.
Which makes for an incredibly boring football game. Yeah, I think last year's was about equally as boring though. So yeah. And,
yeah.
But that's it. We did it again. So
Yeah.
we'll be back in a couple weeks with more updates for you.
We'll see you then. Thanks,
Hopefully
everyone.
it'll be warmer.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to or watching Up Next at WorkTech, brought to you by the Work Defined Podcast Network, the Devon Group, and WorkTech.